Our next presenter is Jason Anderson. Jason is the president of Inside Meta. He has a lot of experience in the research consultancy for interactive entertainment industry, something that I really like, games. And today he's going to share with us little of lies and statistics. Jason.
All right, we're good. I've been accused in English of speaking too quickly and to slow down, so first I'll send good thoughts to the translation booth and hope they're going to be able to keep up, because I have a lot I want to cover. First, a real quick, curious question. Anybody in here ever written a computer program before? Actually, like typed code? Okay, I see 4, maybe 5 hands. So for comparison, when I'm usually out talking to people, about half the room raises their hand. So what you're going to be seeing here for the next 15 minutes is a very different view of the research process and how that works and what you hope to get out of it. I found this picture earlier, and I just love it. I got it on the website even. This is a very good visualization of how technology companies often perceive research data. So I'm going to tell a story here about a recent client experience with a major gaming company. They do $1 billion of business every year. And I was talking with their chief product officer, so not an insignificant person in the business. And he told me that all research is garbage and that it never helps him find what he's looking for. Now, as their research agency, this is a somewhat alarming thing to hear. Because we do still do a fair amount of research, but what's been happening over time is the questions that are asked through a traditional research mechanism are shrinking because their data gathering abilities from their existing products and services continues to expand, as well as having other competing areas where they can go and get data instead of fielding research. The main reason they're doing this shift, in his view, is sample bias. So it's something that if you're not a practitioner, you may look at election polls, for example, and you'll see 50 different election polls at different points, and some will be good and some will be bad. So what's the difference between a good research study and a bad one? Well, if you're not in the business, you may not be able to distinguish that. So his point of view is that maybe when you're doing research, yes, there's a lot of donuts out there, but I'm actually only getting information from the yellow donuts. Or maybe there is so much data and so many places you can buy data that I can pick and choose which color of donuts I want to talk to. Or maybe I just happen to really like orange donuts, and so no matter what I say or do as a researcher, whatever message I bring back is just going to look like a big box of orange donuts. And so from their point of view, the research process is fundamentally skewed. Now that doesn't mean that it doesn't have value, but it means that what you try to do with that and how you integrate that into your decision-making process is very different. There's a show in the US, the Colbert Report. I don't know how many here have seen this show. It's a political comedy commentary, and a few years ago, the host of the show had brought up the word truthiness. This is not a real word. This is just a made-up word. A claim known by intuition to be true without regard to evidence, logic, or facts. This is oftentimes the challenge I have going into a technology company or an entertainment company about how truthful is the data that you're presenting to me as a research agency. So these dots, this is actually election polling data from the 2012 presidential campaign in the US. And what you see is a lot of outliers, and then there's a trend in between that you can make a pattern out of. But as a research client, you may not really know if you're getting a red dot or a black dot. And so they get very reluctant to do any sort of big studies because they don't have the resources or the capability to run 1,000 different polls over a period of time, right? They want to be able to do something reliably. And then they have their BI team. So you can go to the BI team and they'll say, our data is 100% accurate. You never have to worry about this data being skewed or distorted or biased. And they're actually, I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. They know exactly where that data is coming from. That data exists for everybody in their customer database. They control all the technology that's used to collect that data. Now, this is BI professionals talking to the same important executive about here's the value that we deliver to the organization. Yes, you're spending money on this research thing over here, but we can give you something that's reliable and repeatable. For perspective, this is, I mean, billion-dollar business. We're spending maybe $2 million a year on research. They have 25 people full-time in business intelligence. They have internal statisticians. They have predictive modeling engineers. They have data warehousing specialists. They're buying more in technology for managing and analyzing their data than they're buying in traditional research. So that's a very rough, competitive position to be going into here. So our challenge, and the challenge that I was given by this CXO, was earn my trust. Do something, show me something that tells me why I should trust what you do. Now, this is an incomplete challenge. We are still exploring different strategies for approaching this. What I'm going to talk about for the rest of this session is what we are considering and what's resonating best so far with that audience. It really comes down for me to identifying either where are the weaknesses of internal data or where are the opportunities for us to enhance that process. So obviously internal data, data warehouses, these are quantitative data sources for now. And that data only exists for people that you have an existing relationship with. You can't run a big CRM system unless you have a customer to have a relationship with to mine data out of. Now, the technology world, though, is evolving very rapidly. So yes, it's quantitative right now, but text analytics is one example where that tech is catching up with the human ability to actually understand the information. And in fact, I remember seeing at a previous conference the best you can hope for with a human analyst, if you take two humans side by side, ask them to interpret the emotional content of a message, maybe there's 80% consistency between those two people. The technology is about 70% consistent with what those human analysts are saying. So at some point, that is going to get to a level where it is of diminishing return to make human investment in text analytics, and it's better just to go with technology that can run that same exercise on a really large inventory of data. Now, the availability of consumer data outside of your existing database, that is, of course, also an expanding opportunity. We use Google consumer surveys quite a bit, actually, to get really cheap, broad market feedback on things. At $100 or $500 a study, that's a lot faster and easier than going to do a full panel-based study. So again, stepping back and looking at the world from the perspective of a technologist, and they look at what have they been able to do with data over the past 10 to 15 years. It was only in 2000 where you just had to work with your web traffic data, your sales data, your point of sale data perhaps, advertising data, and your consumer research was there. It was a bigger share of your total available set of information. 10 years later, I say social data and CRM. Social data is a huge component now of how these companies interact with their audience. CRM is also, in my environment anyway, the primary way that they can go about doing any kind of detailed analysis of what their customers think and say. 10 years from then, which is only a short 6 or so years from now, geolocation data is going to be ubiquitous in the data they're capturing. Passive behavioral data, we've already heard about a little bit. This is a huge component of what gaming companies do right now. So if, for example, you were playing an online game, just by virtue of having an account with that company, they know where you are when you play, they know when you play, they know how long you play, they know who you play with, they know what monetizes, what doesn't monetize, they know what advertising you looked at to bring you to that game. They know a lot of information about you, have very little need for traditional research. The only exceptions to that really are in the qualitative space, where you'll still see play testing or focus group discussion, that sort of exercise. And then I called it deep profiling. The idea here is that as these different data sources begin to integrate more with each other, which happens a little bit here and there, it's still pretty hard, but as that becomes more automated, the profile you have about each of your respondents gets really, really rich. And so you eliminate the need for entire categories of questioning. We used to do surveys where we would ask people about where they shop or where they bought something. There's no reason to do that anymore, right? It's an entire area of questioning that has died, and that is going to continue to happen over time. So, in our view, the value proposition for research in the past has been collecting the data, right? We have been the gatekeepers to the data that people use to understand the world. Today, our main competitive avenue is understanding the data. So yes, you can get the data from other sources. You can probably get the data cheaper. Maybe you can get it faster. But we are better understanding the data than your internal peers. That is shifting. So in the future, we see it as our role with our clients to help them predict which questions they're going to want answers for and to predict behaviors through analyzing that data. I fully expect that technology-driven companies are going to continue to invest heavily in business intelligence and internal staffing. Research is part of that discussion, but I've certainly seen it in my world where when questions come up at the executive level, it used to be the first person they would go ask would be the CMO. Now it's oftentimes, let's start with a CIO or whoever happens to own business intelligence and see if they can do it first. And if they can't do it, then we'll go back to where we were going before. But that's a very dangerous place to be as a research agency because it means that you are not there at the beginning of the engagement. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is to build bridges with those other departments that are now the new gatekeepers of data. So we're all rats in this maze, right? And we're trying to figure out where is the cheese. And the analogy I think of is that the technology industry is sitting up here looking down at the maze, and they are picking up the cheese and moving it, while we are all still stuck down there with the mouse, trying to find our way blindly without knowing what the rest of the world is like. You have to have technology, in my view, as part of your long-term solution. If you don't have engineers in your company that can build software to do things with data, that's a really big missing part of the story. So what are we doing with this particular client? We're doing two things. We are looking at qualitative research and some unique things that we can do in qual that are hard to replicate with internal data. So we're looking for what's the blue ocean, what's the white space outside of the things they feel they can do with their internal data. I do not want to go head-to-head with a CIO and say that I can analyze your data better than you can. The other thing we are doing is we're looking at predictive modeling and things that we can deliver as a product back to a technology department rather than as a service. So building capabilities, software services, real-time self-service tools that researchers and BI organizations can use to help enhance their question answering capabilities without us needing to be in the middle of every possible engagement. So that's the very short version of this. I'm happy to take any questions.
Raise your hand. Okay. Andrew.
I was interested in your comments about the length of surveys and your use of Google. And we have a client who's a game online game player, and they are very keen on one question, two question surveys. Do you see that trend spreading outside of that environment?
Long term, yes. My expectation is that Google's capabilities as far as length of interview, that will expand to a point where maybe it's not 2 questions, maybe it's 5 to 10 questions with the same respondent. And that if you can get to 5 or 10 questions through a Google-style platform, there's a lot more that you can do than you can with the current solution, and I think it's a known constraint to them, and they're working very aggressively on ways to resolve that.
Okay. We have time for more questions. May I do one? Okay, thank you. Jason, when you talk about this complementary information of big data, internal big data, and this qualitative information, do you have another example that we could?
So, yes, there are many examples. Social media as one data source, I would say, is still an unresolved question for them. It's something that, certainly in entertainment companies, that's still seen as primarily a PR or communications function, and so there are still kind of gaps between what people are doing with Twitter and Facebook and what's happening on the research side of things. They do really excellent integration between behavioral data inside of their services and survey-based or other research data. So, we never do a research study where we're not identifying information that lets us map that project respondent to the internal data warehouse. Because then they can analyze what do you do inside the game, they can analyze what are your motivations for playing a particular game. They have, games use achievements as a pretty common metaphor for you accomplished a particular thing in this title, and those all drive back to fundamental motivations in playing a game. Some of them are social achievements, some of them are competitive achievements, some of them are just progression, so having completed stuff. And they'll use that to then categorize people into different personas. So segmentation research is a thing that's completely gone away for most of these companies.
Thank you. Thank you very much.